Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm the City Witch. Today's video I'm going to be talking to you about a book that I've had in my collection now for a while. Yeah, 8 months, roughly about 8 months. And I would have added this into the video I did on darker magic books that I recommend to you guys, but I just felt this book deserved its own video. This book is probably one of the best books I've ever read on the subject. It's one I highly recommend to add to your collection, and it's definitely a book that gives you a lot of information on darker magic and how to get into that and all the different ingredients and magical tools and sources you can use. The book is wonderfully, beautifully written. It flows, it makes perfect sense. The chapters just flow from one to the other and it's laid out really well. The author is captivating and knowledgeable and gives you the information in a very matter-of-fact, no bullshit way, which I really enjoyed. The book, I found it very, very refreshing and very open-minded, and also I found the author very brave. There was a lot of subjects in this book that I felt she was going to get a lot of backlash on. In this book you will find that she definitely focuses a lot on dark magic and working with the darker forces of the world around you, and if you're looking for a book to stick your toes into that kind of subject, this is definitely a really good beginner book for that. Now, I don't recommend this book for a full-on beginner in the craft, so if you're just starting your magical journey and you're looking for resource material, I would not say this is the book to go to straight away, because even though this book covers a great introduction into darker magic, it doesn't teach you how to cast a spell, and there's research and probably practice you need to do before getting into this book. So I'd still say go out of your way to buy books for beginners on magic. So, you know, a good one would be The Crooked Path if you're looking for a book to get you started on actual traditional witchcraft. In that, it talks to you about the history of it, breaks down on how to cast a spell and design your spells and rituals and the actual tools you will need, and there are very, very few tools as well in that, so very cheap to do. There's a number of different methods that book gives you for making tools. There's a lot of meditations and practices and things you can try as well throughout the book, and it talks to you about building bonds and connections with spirits and energies around you from the home you live in. So there's a lot in that book which will give you the foundation you need to become a magical practitioner in witchcraft, traditional witchcraft, and then you can go into a book like this that will help you connect with not just the lighter side, which you've already been learning, but also the darker side as well. So I would definitely say this is not a beginner friendly book, but it is an intermediate friendly book, and it's definitely a really good book for somebody who for the very first time wants to practice dark magic and needs a place to start. So this book is by Kate Fruller and it's called Of Blood and Bones, Working with Shadow Magic in the Dark Moon, and this is what it looks like. Now this book, as I say, is very captivating and she covers an awful lot of subjects in it which just flow from one chapter to another. The book makes perfect sense. Now, there is something I just want to say first of all, guys. Now, if you are considering practicing dark magic and you are looking for a book to do that, this book's definitely going to give you the foundations and the beginner information for that. But there are things in it I think may step on people's toes, and I don't think the author's done that on purpose, which is why I called her brave. I think she's covered a lot of subjects that most practitioners will deny or sugarcoat or just, you know, skip over because they don't really want to teach it, or they don't know anything about it, or they want you to avoid it because they don't want you going into dark magic. She has flat out just gone, here it is guys, here's everything about dark magic, here's what you can do with dark magic, here's all the ingredients, here's all the facts, here's some resource material. She just went for it basically, which is why I respect her and why I think she's very, very brave. But there are topics in here which I think are going to upset some people. So just to warn anyone out there who is vegan or vegetarian, this book talks about blood magic, working with animal remains, carcasses, really disgusting bodily fluids, and collecting curios and ingredients that may make you squeamish or uncomfortable. Now, I know there are some alternatives to what she recommends. So in the section where she talks about blood magic, you can, for example, use tomato juice as a replacement. Now, how I do that and recommend that to my students who are vegan or vegetarian, I recommend that they choose an animal they want to connect to, that the energies of that animal matches the spell they're going to be doing, that they want to use blood for. But obviously they don't want to use real blood. So if you get an image of that animal, You can rest it underneath the cup that you're using to represent that animal's blood, and then meditate and call upon the spirit of that animal and connect with that animal and ask them to bless that ingredient and turn it into their blood, to fill it with magical properties of that animal, thus incorporating the qualities of that animal into the blood, and then use the tomato juice as if it was blood for the rest of the ritual working or spell. When you're working with bones, if you want to learn osteomancy but you don't like the idea of using bones for that, you can actually instead use cinnamon sticks, and I've had great success with both. I have a proper osteomancy set made of coyote bones that I do my bone readings for, and I have wonderful results from that, and I really like how cheeky they are. They have a wonderful energy. But just to try an alternative, I thought I'm going to try cinnamon sticks, and that worked just as well. And you can carve runes and sigils and patterns into them, or you could carve the words yes and no into it if you wanted. So there's a lot of different ways to work with cinnamon sticks instead of bones as a replacement. I personally found the book, like I said, very refreshing, and I really enjoyed the way she presented the information. She makes it very clear in the book that she's not advising anyone go out and kill an animal or slaughter or sacrifice an animal in any way, and there's no need to do that. And she gives you a full chapter on sacrifices and the actual history behind that. She talks to you about why we don't do that and why there's no need to do that as well. So there are a lot of alternatives along the way. She does have a vegetarian section for alternative items as well, a little bit different to my recommendations, but she has them. So that's, so again, if you're going, oh, I don't know, but I kind of want to learn, there are alternatives in the book. She does give some alternatives, guys, so it's not all bad. The other thing I want to say about this book as well, there's a section on puppet magic, and I do think there's going to be some people that will give backlash on that and say it's cultural appropriation. It's actually not. Doll magic is found from all over the world, from lots of different magical practices. It is not something that belongs to any one practice. So when she talks about it, she refers to it as puppet magic, not voodoo doll magic. And doll magic as a generic subject, like I said, is found all over the world. She gives you many examples on the materials and different ways you can make the doll. She talks about tag locking it and making sure it's connected to the target, and the different ways you can use it for dark and light magic. So she gives you both aspects, and it's a very interesting subject. And again, there are books for that. I think I've already done one on books I recommend for working with doll magic and puppet magic, and again, it's found all over the world, so not limited to one particular culture. I personally don't think there was anything in this book that I personally felt was cultural appropriation. I thought about it long and hard and what was contained and the resources and the materials she's recommending you work with, and they're found all over the world. Brimstone, graveyard dirt, witches' nails, a lot of those things can be found or made yourself. You don't actually need to buy them from anywhere. Animal bones and body parts can be found anywhere. You can work with a taxidermist and have them delivered to you. All the herbs and ingredients that she recommends, they're all dark curios, and a lot of them are poisons, and you can grow them in your own garden. And she does recommend a lot of alternatives for those of you out there who don't want to work with poison or something dangerous, and she gives you the alternatives for if you're vegan or vegetarian as well. She does talk about respecting the spirit of the animal if you're going to be working with animal parts. She even gives you a full method in the book on how to gather a carcass, so say roadkill, and actually honour the animal and the spirit of that animal, work a full ritual on, cleansing that particular carcass, breaking it down, so taking the meat and the fur off it, and then working with the bones. And she gives you methods for how to clean the bones as well by boiling. She talks to you about sterilising them, whitening them, and actually using them in, bone magic and creating bone charms from that. So that was a very, very interesting subject. And she also gives you in the book, which I thought was wonderful, was her method for doing osteomancy and working bone divination. So there is a lot of different ways that you can consider doing osteomancy, but there's not a lot of information on it, so you may have to do research and get those tidbits of information and forge your own way. But in this, she gives you her way of doing it. She teaches you how to make a cloth. She talks to you about the different directions, the influences they have upon the bones, and then based on what the bone is, what animal it comes from, that's how you gain a full reading and understanding of what you're being told during the divination. So that was very insightful and helpful. Now I'm going to give you the contents of the book and let you know what this book contains, and then I'll give you my conclusion, guys. So in the contents of the book, the first thing is she gives you a disclaimer. So this is the author kind of covering herself for anything you choose to do or, take from this book. She's telling you the interpretations of the information is completely on you. She's telling you how you use the information is on you, and it's completely up to you what you use and what you don't use from this book, and she's not responsible for any of that. Then there's a foreword from Matt Oren. If you don't know who he is, he wrote the Psychic Witch book, which is another phenomenal book. I do want to do a book review on that as well. However, I've borrowed it to a student at the moment, so I'm going to have to wait for her to return it. But Matt Oren gives forward, and again, that's very insightful to the author and this book. Then there's an introduction. It's not all light and love. The introduction is very important, and I recommend you guys definitely read that, because she talks about the lighter side of the craft and the differences. She talks a lot about how the darker side is obviously hidden, or put away as if it's something to be ashamed of. And she talks about magic not all being light and love, and that you should be prepared. And I agree with that. Then the book is broken down into parts. So you have part 1, part 2, part 3 and part 4. And then within that is chapters. So part 1 is shadow work and the dark moon currents. Chapter 1 is the dark moon currents and liminal spaces. Chapter 2 is deities and the dark moon. Chapter 3 is dark moon crafts and basics. And then chapter 4 is dark moon divination. So this is where she gives you divination to do with using darker energies. And then part 2 is blood and bones. So this is where we cover parts, like animal body parts. So chapter 5, blood and other fluids. So she talks to you about fluids both from the human body and from animals, and things you can gather out in the wild and then use. And then chapter 6, she talks about animals and their body parts. And again, this is where she talks about getting connected with a taxidermist, gathering stuff from the wild naturally and cleaning it and using it in your craft, and gives you all the methods for that there. And then chapter 7 is bones and skulls. So this is specifically where she gets into the osteomancy, working with bones and making bone charms, and working with skulls. And I thought it was interesting that she specifically put bones and skulls separate to animals and their parts, because that was kind of working with gathering insects, for example, that you find dead, working with spider legs and spider webs. There was stuff about working with furs and guts, and working with, say, a cow's tongue and things like that. So really odd, unusual sections of the animal in that one. But then you get the bones specifically and the skulls, and she gives you a number of different animals that are commonly found, easy to get hold of, and then what those bones and items represent and what they can be used for. So that was also very interesting. And then chapter 3 is the forbidden craft. Part 3 is the forbidden craft, and then it says chapter 8, witches' curios. So this is where she talks about collecting graveyard dirt and dirt from all various different places to use in your craft, making and creating witches' nails, working with coffin nails, gathering brimstone and sulphur, and working with really unusual ingredients and poisons and resins and things like that. Then she goes into chapter 9, poppet magic. And then chapter 10 is cursing and other manipulations. So that is obviously where she starts to talk to you about actually cursing, how to implement a curse, and she gives you some curse ideas. In every single chapter, by the way, there's exercises or spells that you can do and try using all the stuff that she's talking about. And then chapter 11 is sacrifice. So this is where she talks to you about the differences culturally in sacrifices, and how you don't have to actually kill or sacrifice an animal to perform magic, and there's different ways to offer sacrifices. And then part 4, looking death and rebirth in the face. So chapter 12 is death and death rites. Chapter 13 is working with the dead, and chapter 14 is rebirth. And again, that last chapter was really interesting, because you're touching on necromancy there, and working with the dead and the spirits and those kinds of things, and it's connecting with those energies as well, and working with the graveyard and the spirits of the dead. Very, very interesting. She did talk a little bit about ancestral work as well, and connecting with the deceased loved ones in your life, and that was also very interesting. And then to end the book, she has a conclusion, a recommended resources, and then she has a bibliography, and then she has a list of spell work, so spell index, because as I say, every chapter has a spell in it, something you can do. So she's indexed that, so it's easy for you to find later on, so you don't have to flip through every page to find it. Overall, I really enjoyed this book and thought it was fantastic. I would definitely say that the book is something you should add to your collection, definitely something you should read through for yourself. I think it's really good for if you want to start learning darker magic. It's definitely a really good introduction for that. I really loved the author. I thought the book was brilliant. It just flowed, as I've said, and I really liked the information that she included in the book, and I really liked the stories and examples that she gave as well. And I've never read this author before. This is my very first book by her. Now, because this book is a dark magic book, I feel the need to add a disclaimer at the end of this. So the intent here is to give you a book recommendation for a subject that isn't well talked about in the craft, but I also think it's very important for you guys to set yourself your own boundaries and your own rules. for what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do in the craft. So when you start getting into dark magic, you recognise what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, and what you feel is right for you and your craft. Everybody's unique that way. I also think it's important to stop and analyse why you're thinking about doing a spell, and that applies to doing lighter magic and darker magic. Always think about your motivations and what the spell is going to do to the target or to you in your life before you cast it, no matter what the spell is. Take a moment to breathe and think about your motivation. So, you know, if you're angry, anger is your motivation, and are you casting a spell for the right purposes? I'm not saying you can't defend yourself, guys. I'm not saying you can't cast a spell if you want to. I'm just saying from my personal knowledge and experience of 29 years, it's better to stop and think, it's better to plan and prepare, and it's better to really consider your motivations behind doing something, and then also consider what's going to happen as a result of your spell, because you may cast a spell hoping for a certain result, aiming for a certain result, and might not get that at all. So you need to consider all the other possibilities as well, and know that, are you okay with that? Are you okay with these other possibilities happening instead? That's part of learning, that's part of growing, and that's certainly part of adapting your craft and figuring out what works and what doesn't. You cast a spell, it goes wrong, you try again and again and again. That's how it works. Practice makes perfect. But you need to also contemplate how a spell is going to affect a person or you, if it's for you. What possible changes could occur if the change you want doesn't occur, and you also need to know how you did that spell so you can undo it. For those of you out there that are practicing a lot of light magic and you don't like the idea of dark magic, I actually recommend that you do buy books on the darker sections of the craft and you do your research on it. The reason why is, even if you don't ever plan to do those things yourself, you need to thoroughly understand and know how dark magic works, how a curse is actually cast, and how dark rituals work, and all the ingredients that are used in order to properly and correctly defend against those forces, break those sort of spells and remove them from your life. It's never as simple as just taking a cleansing bath, and those who tell you that really don't know what they're talking about. You can actually reduce the effect of a curse or a dark spell upon you by taking a ritual cleansing bath, but you cannot remove the curse that way. You actually need to do a lot more to actually get rid of a curse. So you would not know that unless you did dark research, unless you actually dipped your toes in dark magic and picked up a book on the subject and did your research. So I always think it's good to educate yourself, to look at the subject and include it and add it to your collection. So if nothing else, you have something to fall back on to research in order to remove or defend against those things, and develop your own protection spells that will defend you against anything that you're reading in a dark magic book. I certainly think that this book is worthy of my collection and probably should be added to many of your collections. I give it a 10 out of 10. I think it's wonderful. I hope the writer does a lot more, and I hope to see a lot more books like this one from the author. So thank you very much to Kate Fruller. I do think your book is absolutely wonderful, and I'm looking forward to reading your next book. And I hope it's similar. I hope that you're planning to write a book on curses and go into far more depth on the darker subjects of the craft, because this was really enlightening and really, really good, and definitely a really good beginner guide to dark magic. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, give me that thumbs up and click the bell so YouTube will tell you when my next video comes out. If you'd like to offer light, love and support to this channel, you can do that through either my Amazon wishlist or my Patreon. Both links are provided. If you'd like to book my services or contact me, you can do that through Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, or via email, and all the links are provided, guys. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Blessed be.